George Park graduated from the University of Connecticut in 1970. He served until 1980 as an executive director of the Eastern Connecticut Emergency Medical Services. So George, we have something in common, which was a 501c3 organization set up under the federal initiative to train and equip EMTs and paramedics to work with hospital ERs and regional trauma centers. He worked at the Hartford Insurance Group as a computer operating system specialist, where he invented a system for managing software development that was used across the country. He retired after 20 years and spent several years managing equity investments for a small group of private clients. Since retiring fully in 2007, George has devoted a majority of his time to the study of the Urantia book. He has been a student of the teachings since 1971 and was a founding member and past president of the Connecticut Society. He has published articles in various Urantia movement journals on different topics and presented papers at several conferences. For the last decade, he has focused upon a research of empirical evidence which substantiates the cosmology of the Urantia book. I would like to add that George's presentation is based on his own personal basic research, and it's based on the NASA data, which he himself has looked into and analyzed and researched. And so this represents totally new information. I give you George Park.
Thank you, Ralph, for that very nice introduction. And I'd like to thank both you and the Education Committee for sponsoring this event. It's been very instructive for me that I've been able to participate in my thing. So let me jump right in. It's going to be kind of a sleigh ride. The symposium considers the question of intelligent design and the universe. This theme really recasts in modern terms the age-old search for evidence of God's supernatural intervention in the world. Science conceives of evolution as a mechanistic process which can only yield accidental development. Intelligent design, on the other hand, conceives of evolution as a purposeful process that requires intelligent supernatural intervention in the chain of material causation to steer evolutionary development toward a creative end. This paper first examines why the physical structure of the universe, as it is revealed in the Urantia book, must be the result of intelligent design accomplished through supernatural intervention, then proves that the universe is organized in the way that Revelation describes. Concludes with a brief consideration of the metaphysical relationship between this new scientific cosmology and the transcendent presence of God in the universe. So the first question which needs to be answered is, what would constitute proof of supernatural intervention? Being material, supernatural cannot be directly observed. Science can only infer the reality of supernatural causes based upon the axiomatic assumption that every event must have a cause. For example, the force of gravity cannot be directly observed, but Newton inferred its existence based upon predictable interactions between material bodies. If an event has no natural cause that we can identify, we infer it must have a supernatural. There must be a supernatural cause because the universe must have a beginning, and an uncaused cause must be a supernatural one. However, rapidly advancing science has made all such metaphysical inferences suspect. For most of recorded history, it was universally believed that the heavens must be a spiritual realm because there is no apparent natural cause for celestial motions. Science disproved this belief and has gone much further. Einstein replaced Newton's mysterious force of gravity with the relativistic mechanism of curved spacetime. Cosmology has replaced a supernatural first cause with a mechanistic one.
George, I'm sorry
Yes?
to interrupt, but we're still receiving a lot of echo. We think that your computer audio is still on, perhaps?
I don't believe so. I believe I turned. Oh, you mean the microphone is still on?
Yes, you need to turn it off.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Uh-huh.
That was a bad thing.
I'm trying to find the mute. Can you mute my microphone from that end?
You don't let me try it.
Bottom right corner.
You already,
I
beg your pardon?
Okay, I just muted it. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Oh,
you.
good. Then I did it from this end. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, that's much better.
She did it, George. Thank you very much.
I was afraid I'd cut off the phone.
Sorry for the interruption. We could
Not at all.
understand you, but barely. Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
All right, so how's the audio now?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so is the audio all right now?
Yes.
Great, very good.
Excellent.
Okay. So cosmology, Einstein replaced Newton's force of gravity with relativity, and cosmology has replaced a supernatural first cause with a mechanistic one. Supposedly, random quantum fluctuations in the space-time of an original gravitational singularity accidentally caused a Big Bang. So science has demonstrated a prodigious ability to infer natural causes for phenomena. At this point in time, a persuasive proof of supernatural intervention requires phenomena for which science can never credibly infer a natural cause. But it's hard to imagine what such phenomena might be. The Urantia book overcomes this difficulty with a new concept of the universe. The preeminent feature in the universe is the plane of creation. God dwells on paradise at the center of this universal plane. He continuously creates new energy here and there in the universe, which leads to the formation of new stars and galaxies. Galaxies are organized in concentric space levels, which revolve about paradise under the force of absolute gravity. Space alternately expands and contracts from just beneath paradise. All of these phenomena require God's continuous supernatural intervention. But this revealed model of the universe is just a theory so far, and it completely contradicts the modern consensual theory of a Big Bang origin. In 1929, Edwin Hubble made the shocking discovery that the universe is expanding. This led to the inference that space expansion must have been caused by a Big Bang of some sort. And immediately after this primal explosion, the universe was completely filled with a dense, superheated plasma of subatomic particles. As space expanded, this plasma cooled off, atoms formed, and randomly distributed stars and galaxies appeared. Looking forward in time, all galaxies must eventually disintegrate, and all stars must finally burn out. This whole story of the origin and final heat death of the universe is governed by the law of entropy. Entropy is the natural tendency of work energy to dissipate until energy is uniformly dispersed throughout a system. Entropy causes all hot things to radiate energy and cool off, all dynamic mechanisms to run down and stop, and all complex structures to fall apart and become disordered. The law of entropy prevents the evolution of any complex universal structure like the plane of creation from the uniform distribution of matter caused by a Big Bang event. So these are two mutually exclusive theories about cosmic evolution, and they result in completely different organizations of matter in the universe. This difference establishes an empirical test for these theories. If future observations confirm a uniform distribution of galaxies, this would validate the Big Bang theory. Confirmation of a planar concentration of galaxies would prove there is supernatural intervention in the universe for the following reasons. The universe is a physically isolated system simply because it is the whole of all things material. The dynamics of a Big Bang origin cause a uniform distribution of matter in the universe. The universe begins in a state of disorder, and the law of entropy prevents any increase in its overall orderliness. This scientific premise is formalized in the cosmological principle. On sufficiently large cosmic scales, matter must be uniformly distributed in the universe throughout its entire history. So the evolution of a universal planar structure from an initial state of disorder would contravene entropy. If this occurs, then since this law governs all natural processes, the law of entropy, it cannot be violated without undermining all scientific understanding. To avoid invalidating this physical law, the emergence of this universal plane requires the addition of work energy to the universe, simply because it requires work to create order out of chaos. Whoops. Hang on a second. I'm missing a page here. Okay. Oh dear.
Do we have?
Well, I guess I'm going to have to wing it. Okay, so the only way to add work energy to the universe is by creating it within the universe. But the law of conservation of energy says there's no natural means or process which can either create or destroy energy. So to save science, science has to infer that this energy is created natural cause. Okay, so there was no evidence of anything like the plane of creation anytime before the year 2000. So, but since 2000, there's been an explosion of new observation, which now makes it possible to identify the plane of creation. I published a work 3 years ago on this, which is available on the internet. But to get into the details, well, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to share some of the findings, plus some additional ones. So this, in the Urantia book, we're told that the plane of creation consists of 6 concentric space levels. This is all revelation. God dwells on paradise at the absolute center of the universe. And the central universe of Avona, shown as the small blue circle in this diagram, encircles paradise and contains a billion perfect worlds, but no stars. We are located in the superuniverse space level, the white ring of galaxies immediately surrounding Havona. Havona and the superuniverse space level together form the grand universe, the domain of the Supreme Being. So that's the highest level overview. And if we begin where we are, the superuniverse space level, this level is described in detail by the Universal Center in paper 15. This ring-like structure contains 7 superuniverses, one of which is our superuniverse of Ovantan. Everything in Ovantan revolves about its capital of Uversa, which we are told is between 200,000 and 250,000 light years distant from us. This is outside our Milky Way galaxy, which has a radius of 50,000 light years. So while Ovantan revolves about Uversa, Uversa is orbiting Paradise in the superuniverse space level. This revealed sevenfold segmentation of the space of the grand universe yields a simple ratio. The distance from Uversa to Paradise is 2.3 times the radius of Ovantan. So this is all from Revelation. There's no evolutionary knowledge involved in that. But the book goes on and gives numerous statements which suggest that Ovantan is what astronomers call the local group of galaxies. This grouping was identified in the 1930s and includes large Andromeda and Milky Way galaxies, dozens of normal-size and dwarf galaxies, and hundreds of smaller globular clusters. The approximate radius of the local group is 4 million light years. So if Ovantan is the local group, then the distance to Paradise should be 2.3 times 4 million light years, or 9.2 million light years. Given this radius of 9 million light years, the other 6 superuniverses should be well within 36 million light years of us. They also, in the book, they tell us that the superuniverse space level is a torus-like structure. We are near Uversa, which is located in the central orbital core of the space level. From this location, the other superuniverses in the grand universe should appear as a long belt of galaxies stretching across the sky. We can call this belt the superuniverse wall. Revelation gives us some idea of the size of the superuniverse space level and how it should appear to us. NASA's extragalactic database, which is publicly accessible, gives us the means to search for the other superuniverses. This database is the authoritative worldwide master list of all objects beyond our Milky Way. According to the historical record maintained in this database, in the year 2000, there were 726 galaxies known to be more than 5 million light years away and less than 36 million light years away. This all-sky chart plots these galaxies relative to a 2008 NASA photo of the plane of the Milky Way. It shows that nothing like the expected superuniverse wall was visible within this volume at the beginning of this century. But just 10 years later, the number of galaxies jumps more than tenfold. The superuniverse wall is now obvious as a dense belt of over 5,000 galaxies. This belt follows the path of a great circle across the sky, which is, again, what we would expect from the description in Revelation. The linear form of the superuniverse wall becomes apparent if everything is rotated 57 degrees around the north-south axis and 61 degrees around its east-west axis. Doing so, the galaxies in the superuniverse wall form a well-defined linear structure. The change in spherical coordinates transforms the linear appearance of the Milky Way into a sinusoidal form. Gravitational revolution is the only credible explanation for this linear structure. We know that stars cluster around about the disk-like plane of the Milky Way because they are in gravitational revolution about its center. For the same reason, the superuniverse wall must be the appearance of a disk-like plane of galaxies formed by gravitational revolution about some center. This hypothesis of a disk-like plane of galaxies is confirmed in this overhead view of the grand universe out to 36 million light years. Green wedge marks the left and right edges of the superuniverse wall in the previous picture. The blue 4-point star at the center is the location of Urantia. Blue circle surrounding it defines the 4 million light year radius of Urantia. Moving up and away from Urantia in this graphic, the galactic density rapidly increases to a maximum in the arc outlined in yellow, and then rapidly decreases. So there's a very sharp spike in galactic density here, where it is 289 times the average density in this volume. This is comparable to the difference between a solid and a gas. This yellow outlined arc must be a segment of the dense central core of the superuniverse space level. If it is, it defines the orbital path of the superuniverse capitals around Paradise and should pass directly over Urantia. An extension of this arc describes an orbital path which passes exactly over Urantia. 7 galaxy groups, the size of the local group, exactly fill up this orbital path. The local group is part of a larger circular structure whose center is 9 million light years away, which is almost exactly the predicted distance of 9.2 million light years. Gravitational revolution is the only credible explanation for this ring-like central core defining the orbital path of the superuniverse capitals. If the galaxies in this central core are revolving about Paradise, there should be no relative motion between them. This is analogous to the absence of any motion between fixed locations along the equator of a revolving sphere. This empirical test is satisfied. There is no detectable relative motion between us and the thousands of galaxies in this central core. These multiple confirmations of revelation conclusively prove that Urantia is the local group, and this larger circular structure is the revolving superuniverse space level. We have good reason to believe at the center of this circular structure. The historical evidence proves that no one could have known about this circular structure before the turn of this century. Nevertheless, its form, internal structure, relative size, and gravitational revolution were all known to the authors of the Urantia book before 1955. This demonstration of superhuman knowledge justifies our trust in the authors, who tell us that the Isle of Paradise is located at the geometric center of this circular structure. So we can now map the grand universe at the center of the master universe. The first outer space level is a continuous belt of cosmic activity encircling the superuniverse space level. This annular structure contains at least 70,000 aggregations of matter which we're told, each of which is greater than any one of the present superuniverses, end quote. The stellar mass of this space level is 10,000 times that of all 7 superuniverses. So to accommodate all of these stars in an annular structure, the radius of the central core of the first outer space level needs to be very roughly 100 times the 9 million light year radius of the superuniverse space level. The gravitational plane of the first outer space level, we're told, is the same as that of the superuniverses. So it should appear as a belt of galaxies directly behind the superuniverse wall. There was no evidence of anything matching this description of the first outer space level before 2003. In that year, J. Richard Gott of Princeton University discovered the Sloan Great Wall. This overhead view of the plane of creation out to 1.5 billion light years plots the galaxies in this stupendous planar structure. Paradise is at the center of this chart. With a length of 1.4 billion light years, the Sloan Great Wall is currently recognized as the largest fully observable structure in the universe. It followed an approximately circular path at a radial distance of 1.1 billion light years from Paradise. This is 122 times the radius of the superuniverse space level. There are roughly 18,000 galaxies in the Sloan Great Wall, which equates to about 80,000 galaxies projected over the whole orbit, which is consistent with the expectation of at least 70,000 galaxies. The density of galaxies in the Sloan Great Wall is about 6 times greater than in surrounding regions of space, which clearly distinguishes its form. In this all-sky map, the galaxies in the Sloan Great Wall are shown behind the blue outline of the superuniverse wall. Paradise is the bluish dot. And the gravitational plane of the Sloan Great Wall is the same as that of the superuniverse space level. It has the annular form, stellar mass, cosmic alignment, and relative size described by Revelation. These multiple confirmations of Revelation prove that the Sloan Great Wall is a segment of the central core of the first outer space level. And beyond the first outer space level is the second, and the authors say very little about the galaxies in the second outer space level, even less about those in the third, and nothing at all about those in the fourth. But if we assume that the Sloan Great Wall, the first outer space level, is in the middle of this space level, then the second outer space level should begin at about 2 billion light years. Revelation leads us to expect, again, that the galaxies in the second outer space level form a linear belt directly behind the Sloan Great Wall because everything is on the same plane, the plane of creation. The typical galaxies are difficult to observe beyond 2 billion light years. However, quasars, quasi-stellar objects, are extremely luminous galaxies, which are currently observed out to 28 billion light years. This is about 60% of the universe's theoretical radius of 46 billion light years. As of 2013, about 150,000 quasars were identified, and almost all of them, 99.8%, are more than 2 billion light years distant. Since quasars are thought to have hundreds of times the mass of large galaxies like Andromeda and the Milky Way, they can be used to investigate the distribution of matter in the universe at distances between 2 and 28 billion light years. This graphic plots the three-dimensional positions of these 150,000 quasars as viewed from the side, looking along the plane of creation. It's obvious that quasar density between the two yellow lines bracketing the plane of creation, the density here is 3 times the average density. However, as is apparent from this plot, there are large areas with no quasars simply because only about 1/3 of the sky has been systematically surveyed. A more strict analysis of quasar distribution is obtained by using a completely surveyed area. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey covers the sky from the left edge of the superuniverse wall to the right edge of the Sloan Great Wall, up to a height of more than 60 degrees of latitude. Over 73,000 quasars are found in this survey area. Plotting these, a dense wall of quasars is obvious, running along the plane of creation. This planar concentration of galaxies has a density that is more than 4 times the average in the survey area. This overdensity extends from 2 billion to 20 billion light years and clearly distinguishes this structure, the wall of quasars, from surrounding space. The gravitational plane of this structure aligns with the plane of the superuniverse and first outer space levels to within 1 degree. The wall of quasars can only be our view of the second outer space level. Because it is 18 billion light years deep, it may also include some or all of the third outer space level. In its longest dimension, this planar structure is about 1/3 of the galaxy's theoretical diameter of 93 billion light years. This conclusively proves that galaxies are not uniformly distributed in the observable universe. This refutes the cosmological principle and conclusively disproves the Big Bang theory. The strongest evidence offered in support of the Big Bang theory is the cosmic microwave background radiation. This radiation has a highly uniform temperature and in every direction in the sky of 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. It also has an extremely high redshift. This redshift places its point of origin at the outer limits of the expanding universe. This supports the hypothesis of the Big Bang, which is that this radiation was emitted very shortly after the initial event. So this all-sky temperature map of the CMB radiation is interpreted as direct evidence of the chaotic state of the plasma-filled universe some 13.8 billion years ago. This hypothetical origin of the CMB radiation has run into difficulties. In 2004, Dominic J. Schwartz, an astrophysicist at CERN, found that large areas of the sky have temperatures very slightly warmer or colder than the average of 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. The centers of these areas, their so-called multipoles, are improbably aligned with the ecliptic plane, the plane of our solar system. You put the odds of this alignment occurring by accident at less than 1 in 1,000. This makes it very improbable that this radiation was emitted by a chaotic superheated plasma, contradicting the Big Bang theory. However, no causal connection has ever been found between these multipoles and our solar system. So this has led most physicists to conclude that this finding is an insignificant statistical anomaly. It turns out this conclusion is wrong. Compared to the ecliptic plane, these multipoles correlate twice as strongly with the plane of creation. Unlike our insignificant solar system, the plane of creation is the largest possible structure in the universe. The high correlation of these CMB multipoles with the plane of creation supports the strong inference of a causal relationship between the two. This inferred causal relationship is consistent with a universal extension of the plane of creation. And a striking feature in this all-sky chart is the location of the CMB dipole, the white dot directly beneath Paradise, which is shown as the bluish dot. This dipole is the warmest location in the background radiation, which makes it the least redshifted. This reduced redshift can be explained by a relative approaching velocity between the sun and this cosmic microwave background radiation in the direction of the CMB dipole. Modern theory attributes this velocity to the sun moving in the direction of the dipole. However, in revealed cosmology, this relative velocity is attributed to space expanding from the direct of the dipole toward the sun, which is relatively stationary. The measured rate of space expansion and this velocity relative to the cosmic microwave background place the point of space expansion 900,000 light years directly beneath Paradise. This location is consistent with Revelation. Quote, there is a confluence of pervaded and unpervaded space just underneath nether Paradise, end quote. End quote, space seemingly originates just below nether Paradise, end quote. So the CMB dipole beneath Paradise is a physical manifestation of the phenomenon of space respiration, which I go into in some more detail in the addendum. So Revelation inspires the search for the plan of creation. If it's discovered, it becomes an independently verifiable scientific fact confronting modern cosmology. The bell has been rung and it can't be unrung. This planar concentration of galaxies proves that space expansion was not caused by a Big Bang. So there's no longer any possible natural cause for space expansion. It must have a supernatural cause. The universe may be far older than 13.8 billion years, since its age can no longer be measured from the beginning of space expansion. Gravitational revolution is the only credible explanation for the plane of creation, but the linear gravity of Newton and Einstein cannot be the cause. Linear gravity causes a curvature in space-time which lays out orbital paths of least inertial resistance around a central mass. It has been recently determined that the space-time of the observable universe has no detectable curvature. It is flat, like the ideal space of Euclidean geometry. So it's necessary to infer the existence of a supernatural gravitational force which acts from the center of universal revolution 9 million light years away. The theory of relativity denies the possibility of absolute motion, but universal revolution is necessarily an absolute motion about an absolutely stationary location. The actual evidence for space expansion, the redshift distance relation, only demonstrates that space is expanding outward from a location not too far from us. Since space expansion is a universal phenomenon, this location must be absolutely stationary. The only absolutely stationary location in the universe is the center of universal revolution 9 million light years away. The universe is evolving a planar structure, which requires the supernatural creation of work energy in the universe. This creation of energy is necessary but not sufficient to explain universe evolution. This created energy cannot be added in an indiscriminate and haphazard manner, since this would disrupt the evolution of any universal structure. It must be added in a coordinated way which constructively evolves the plane of creation. This universal coordination and control over the creative addition of energy requires science to recognize the theoretical reality of some supernatural agent. The dynamic unity manifest in universe evolution requires a single supernatural agent at the center of the universe who is responsible for the creation of energy and the absolute motions of universal revolution and universal space expansion. It would be reasonable to call this transcendental supernatural agent the first source and center, the primal cause of the universal physical phenomena of all space, end quote. Science is compelled now to recognize a supernatural first source and center, but it cannot identify, excuse me, Science is compelled to recognize a supernatural first source and center, but cannot identify its nature. Philosophy can. While inanimate mechanisms obey the law of entropy, living organisms overcome entropy. They grow from simple into complex structures through the constructive use of work energy. And they always manifest the unifying animation of mindedness, because, quote, life is both mechanistic and vitalistic, material and spiritual, end quote. Only a living cosmic intelligence could be the metaphysical cause behind the creation of energy and the orderly evolution of the plane of creation. The evolution of a universal order proves this cosmic intelligence is executing some intelligent design. But metaphysics and philosophy cannot discuss the final purpose behind this creative plan. Religion can, quote, God created the heavens and formed the earth to be inhabited, end quote. The spiritual purpose behind this plan is revealed in the eternal Son, the first created person to inhabit the universe. The infinite will behind this spiritual purpose is revealed in the universal Father, the creator of the first dwelling place in the universe, the Isle of Paradise. The cosmic intelligence carrying out this purpose is revealed in the infinite Spirit, the first executive of divine providence in the universe. Quote, Providence is the sure and certain march of the galaxies of space and the personalities of time toward the goals of eternity, end quote. A little more than 400 years ago, Galileo turned his newly invented telescope to the heavens and suddenly saw hundreds of times as many stars. His discoveries destroyed the ancient belief that the universe revolves about the Earth. Now, hundreds of times as many galaxies are suddenly visible in greatly improved telescopes. The worldwide discovery of the plane of creation only waits for an astronomer to find the wall of quasars directly behind the Sloan Great Wall. This discovery will destroy the modern worldview of a chaotic, mechanistic universe. The long, grim ideological struggle between science and religion is ending. A new era of cosmic enlightenment dawns with the realization that the first source and center and the universal Father are one and the same. Revealed cosmology becomes a powerful scientific truth, working in metaphysical harmony with true religion to advance the supreme purposes of ethical revelation. And that concludes my presentation. Questions?
Several thousand.
George, that was superb.
No, thank you.
Outstanding.
Yeah, thank you, George.
Yes.
George, this is Phil Calabrese.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. I asked Brian Keating at a talk at UCSD when he said something about the Big Bang and how many galaxies there were by projecting the numbers that they had discovered in uniformly in all directions. Whether there had been a deep space photo that was in the direction perpendicular to the Milky Way, and he said no. And then started talking about how everything was uniform in all directions. And I said, well, how can you say that when I'm reading about this axis of evil in the microwave background radiation, and that there's more energy on one side of the plane than on the other, which was statistically significant. And he said, in a room full of people, well, that's a sophisticated question. I'd like to talk about it, offline. And when I came up later on and looked at him, he looked at me warily. So I didn't pursue it. But I'm wondering why we don't have a deep space photo from Hubble in the other direction, which would presumably not reveal all those outer space galaxies because they're not in the plane. That would definitely disprove the isometric, the isometry that's being assumed, because the Big Bang implies uniformity rather than a plane. Have you heard of any suggestion? I mean, they're down there on the South Pole or North Pole looking and...
Well, I don't know, the Hubble Space Telescope, because it's in space, it can't perform systematic surveys. All systematic surveys of the sky covering large contiguous areas are all done by ground-based facilities. So the Hubble they can point the Hubble anywhere they want, but there's a relatively small field you're looking at, like a degree or, much less. So the other issue is that no one, as far as I can tell, in my reading, has any interest in examining the proposition that matter is uniformly distributed in the universe. It's simply taken as a given. So when you never question a premise, you never bother to examine it. The Urantia book, yeah.
It would seem that there's a Nobel Prize or of some sort for first one who points this out and has the data. So I'm surprised, but I agree.
Yeah, the data is all there in there's more data that will be coming, but the data is already all there in NASA's extragalactic database, which is publicly accessible to anyone, including a novice like me, who can just go in and say, for instance, the superuniverse wall. I just went on a lark. I read an article about the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, and then that led me to the NASA extragalactic database. And just on a lark, I said, show me everything within a redshift of 36 million light years. And I got the data back, and I just plotted it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I go like, holy mackerel, what is this? And then, one thing led to another, and so then I said, well, does the superuniverse wall line up with anything else? And sure enough, the Sloan Great Wall. And then eventually I said, well, what about quasars? So I just went into the NASA database and said, give me a list of all the quasars in your database. And there were 150,000 of them, more or less. And I plot those, and then the same thing shows up. So, all of this is, it's already independently verifiable by anyone who wants to look. Like I said, the real issue is that people don't want to look.
Agreed.
George, this is Dave Newfer. Congratulations on your paper. It's excellent. I was along the same lines of what was just asked. Has any photographic evidence, or have you noticed anything about the upper and lower space reservoirs which would show anything there or beyond?
The plane of creation, by coincidence, I assume, is only tilted about 1.5 degrees to the equatorial plane of the Earth. So what that means is if we turn the telescope and looked up at the North Pole, we should see a lot less than we see in other directions. And I can't speak, not being an astronomer, I can't speak with any kind of authority on it, but I have read in several locations that there's very little interest in looking at the North Pole, which would be the direction of the upper space reservoir. There's very little interest in looking in that direction because there's not much there. So, unless you have, there's no reason to look for anything unless you have a theory about what you might find. So there's no reason for astronomers to look for the plane of creation or the space reservoirs or anything else because there's no theory. It just doesn't even occur to them. And then when they read the Urantia book, I remember reading the Urantia book back in the 70s and just being enthralled with this description of the universe, and then exploring what astronomers were saying, and it was, anyone in the mainstream would say this is utter science fiction. There's absolutely no way this could be true. And now based on these findings and some additional ones, which I cover in the addendum, it's now the fact that revealed cosmology is the only credible, scientifically credible cosmology. All of these modern theories based on the Big Bang scenario are impossible. So it's completely flipped. But of course, nobody wants to see a lifetime of devotion to a theory be overturned. So the same thing, a similar sort of thing happened in the early 17th century when Galileo reported that Jupiter has moons and Venus has phases, and therefore the universe cannot possibly revolve around the Earth. It took decades. It was literally half a century before that was commonly accepted. So in one sense, it doesn't matter what data you show people when you're overturning their entire worldview. It just takes a certain period of time for it to sink in and people to be able to accept it.
Can I just ask one more thing? There might be an alternate view where it says that Nebadon is situated toward the edge of Orvonton, and that Andromeda is in the first outer space level, as it's uninhabited, and it could be, you could easily accept that it would be in the and that something might happen to light between Andromeda and Nebadon because of the quiet space zone in between. I'm just putting that out as an alternate view of the size of the superuniverse level.
Actually, I have to respectfully disagree because, in this, I don't know, can you still see my screen on your
Yes.
monitor there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So because the local group fits into this circular structure with a measured radius of 9 million light years, we know there's just no more any doubt, despite all of the somewhat vague descriptions in the book. There's no longer any doubt that Orvonton is the local group, because it fits. Local group is the only thing that fits into this circular structure, which we can now see, and it fits into the internal structure where there are 7 equal-sized, like in this picture. This is a picture of the grand universe. You say, are there any pictures? Well, this is a simulated picture. It plots the 8,000 galaxies which were identified as being within 36 million light years, and you can see here's the local group and 7 of them, equal-sized aggregations of stars, fit in a circle whose center is 9 million light years away. There are just too many. It's not possible for Orvonton to be anything other than the local group if you accept the data that's in NASA's database.
Hey, George, this is Dick Ream.
Hi, Dick.
I'm kind of online with David, and I have been struggling for a long time with the 100,000 light year diameter of the Milky Way, and I think that your presentation is wonderful. I think you've really identified a lot of outer space levels. And I know the Urantia book does talk about the confusion of astronomers because of all of the multiple rotations between system and constellation and the universe and minor sector and major sector. So it seems that it's easier to get data looking out of our Milky Way than within. And then I saw a study back in 2001 from some astronomers, and I'm going to try to find that paper and send it to you. But they saw interaction within the small and large Magellanic clouds that are in orbit. And their conclusion was that this interaction that they were seeing had to be from the Milky Way galaxy. And their conclusion was that they had to resize the Milky Way between 400,000 and 600,000 light years. And those numbers now would now put it in line with what the Urantia book says as far as being 500,000 light years in diameter. So is it possible there could be error there in some of these measurements?
An error in the size of the Milky Way?
Yes.
Certainly. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, originally they thought the local group was maybe 2.5 million light years in radius, and then they keep discovering things, and so it goes beyond. So the numbers change. I guess my point about Providence being the local group is that it's the only thing that fits regardless of changes in distances, which happen as we get more sophisticated. It's the only structure which can possibly fit into this larger circular structure, which is proportionally composed of 6 additional groupings of galaxies, similar to the grouping of galaxies in the local group. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to work my way up from the bottom, where they talk about, Urantia and Nebanon and Ensa and, all of it. And I found that the way they describe Splandon, our major sector, and how it fits as one of 10 in the universe, in the major sector of Splandon, there's such a latitude of description, or a latitude of interpretation in their descriptions, that it makes it very difficult. I still haven't been able to resolve everything I read in the Urantia book. So I took a leap. I said, well, what if the local group is Orbantan? So making that leap leads to the conclusion that, yes, that's the only thing that it can be. I mean, it's described in the Urantia book as being 1/7 of the grand universe, and we see a structure where it's 1/7 of the grand universe. So that, to me now, that's the place to start. So all of there are 10 major sectors in Orbantan. What are they? Well, most people assume that Milky Way would be one, and Andromeda would be other, but identifying the other 10 sectors, it's a challenge. But if you begin from the top and work your way down, I think we have much better success.
Yes.
So Andromeda is part of the grand universe and part of Orbantan. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, and the universe sensor says, there are parts of, he makes a distinction in paper 15 between inhabited and uninhabited portions. And then he sort of sticks it on the end, and in the uninhabited portion of Orbantan is Andromeda. So it's not currently inhabited, according to what Universal Sensor says. But for a lot of reasons, I think it's important to remember that what the Universal Sensor wrote was written circa 1934, when Hubble hadn't published his findings on the local group. So maybe they didn't know what he was going to call it, and maybe they didn't know which galaxies he would include and exclude. So, that was not even a decade, well, not even 5 years after extragalactic astronomy and cosmology began. It wasn't until the mid to late 1920s that Hubble finally convinced people that the universe was more than 150,000 light years in diameter. Before that, when Einstein developed his general theory of relativity, everybody assumed the universe wasn't more than a few 100,000 light years across. So, it's hard to realize how much knowledge has changed in the last 100 years about the universe.
What about the distance that Andromeda is said to be, well, I should say it the other way, that the light from Andromeda took almost 1 million years to reach us, but contemporary science says Andromeda is 2.5 or so light years away, a million light years. So there seems to be, and some people think that, well, that's just the 20th century estimation, but I don't agree with that. I don't think that the authors would have put in such a specific number. They could have said something fuzzier. So it seems that the redshift is somewhat distorting our distance. Our interpretation of the redshift is distorting our distances. And I'm wondering how that factors into your calculations.
Well, I accept the modern determination of distances, at least in terms of the local group, because I simply, they said that some of their facts, scientific facts, would have to be revised. Now, they could have said, when everybody thought Andromeda was a million light years away, they could have written in 1934, well, actually, it's 2.5 or 2.6 million light years. They didn't say that. Instead, they said, well, yeah, you think it's a million light years, so we'll go with that. There's any number of people have pointed out, there's that disclaimer in paper 103, I think, or, we're not allowed to tell you everything. They give us enough. And so if the interest in cosmology is finding specific facts, then the Urantia book is probably not a helpful guide. But if the interest in cosmology is with the concept of the universe and how it's organized and how matter moves and how things are segregated and what the original cause of things is, then the Urantia book has more to say than anyone else. So I'm not entirely dogmatic. I take the Urantia book as being a guide that is fundamentally true, but details like the distance to Andromeda are subject to revision. At least that's how I approach it.
Well, I guess I respectfully disagree, at least in the sense that I don't think they make, revision means adding usually information, not so much correcting it. And so I still think that if they wanted to, they could have said something fairly fuzzy about how far, Andromeda is. So I'm still looking for us to find. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden they say, well, we thought it was this far away, but actually it's closer.
George, along that line, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I've gone back to one of my old sets of Britannica Encyclopedia some time ago. It's been quite a while, so I'm not altogether certain I remember it exactly correctly. But I think the measurements listed there were matched the numbers in the Urantia book rather very closely in terms of the size of the Milky Way, the distance of Andromeda, and those are the two that sort of stick in my mind. And then, and then later on, I think this is correct, that astronomers introduced a factor to account for the dust material in the universe, which would dim the intensity of the light coming from the stars, which would affect their calculations of distance. Do you know if that's the case? And I think as a result, that shifted a number of the presumed distances that now are in a disagreement with the Urantia book statements.
Yes, I agree. One of the biggest revisions to distances occurred in the mid-1950s, or early 1950s, when Walter Bade, an astronomer on a par with Hubble, discovered that Hubble was using Cepheid variables in Andromeda. Hubble thought there was one class of Cepheid variables, and Walter Bade discovered that there were two. And Hubble was miscalculating his distance, so the distances doubled based on redshift and Cepheid variables, Cepheid variable distances. So right there, you double it from essentially 1 million light years to 2. So who was wrong? Is the Urantia book wrong, or is it the fact that they didn't want to give us unearned information, so they just repeated back to us what we thought, knowing that we would discover later on that essentially, our distance measurements were off. Distances are the most difficult thing that astronomy deals with. The whole concept of distance is just figuring out the distance to something is a lot of what astronomers try to do because it's so difficult. And Hubble, in the Urantia book, it's in paper 12, it says that by your calculations, how does it go? By your calculations, distant galaxies are moving away at 100,000 miles a second. Well, that equates to 500 kilometers per second, which was Hubble's original estimate. Well, now it's almost 8 times less that. Instead of 500 kilometers per second per megaparsec, or 3.26 million light years, that original finding by Hubble has been reduced to something like 70 kilometers per second for every 3.26 million light years. So again, they're repeating back to us what we knew in the 1930s. They're not going to say, it may look to you like things are moving away at 500 kilometers per second, but it's really only 70. So they could have said that, they knew that, but they didn't say that. And I think the distance to Andromeda falls into the same category. They knew the right distance, but they weren't going to give us knowledge.
George, this is Dave Newfer again. On another subject, we talk about the plane of creation, and we know that the super universes are not complete, but they are in the process of completion. Do you believe that the super universes will become more planar as time goes on, and how do you see it as being, how will it look when it is complete?
I think it'll, as far as I can tell, it's planar now. If you look out, for instance, let me bring up this. Come on. Okay, this is just the data from NASA's database for everything out to 36 million light years, and you can see in the center that's a planar structure. It's a little less than 10 degrees high and about 75 degrees long. If we could see through the Milky Way, and if we had surveys in the southern hemisphere, we would see it as a continuous circle around the sky. You know, sort of like if you were on Saturn and looking up and you saw the rings, they would form a continuous circle around Saturn in the sky. So I think the shape might change a little bit, things might get filled in a little bit, but I think fundamentally, at least on any sort of time frame that we can imagine, I think this is fundamentally the way it's going to look.
And this picture is almost paradise shaped.
Pardon?
It looks like this photo is, or image is almost paradise shaped.
The one on the screen?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could say that, except we're only seeing like 150 degrees of the, in other words, if you look at it from overhead, this yellow arc is the central core of the superuniverse space level where,
I see.
and so you can see it's about 150 degrees of a circle. Of course, now the farther away, like the first outer space level, we can only see about 70 degrees of that out of 360 degrees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
George, this is Phil again. I
Hi, Bill.
wanted to ask you to say something about, well, you mentioned that relativity denies a stationary place. Of course, Einstein's relativity. You must
Right.
be, or are you familiar with Kurt Gödel's model, which satisfied his field equations, but it does have a center, and in fact, everything orbits that center, and I guess spins around it too. And he presented this paper to his friend Albert Einstein on his, I think, 50th birthday. And the story goes that Einstein wasn't sure whether to thank him or not.
Yeah. I looked at that a little bit because of the idea of rotation, but it turns out, from what I understand, is that it's a time diagram, it's not a space diagram. So there's a center to time. In other words, it's kind of it's one of those games mathematicians play where you can create a model which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with reality. So in other words, instead of revolution occurring in space, it's occurring in time. So I don't know quite what to make of that, and that's about as far as I've investigated.
George, it's Nigel Nunn here. Thanks, great paper, thank you very much.
Yes.
Look, one of the interesting distinctions they make between the grand universe and the outer space levels is in terms of age, that the idea that the super universe space level is truly ancient. You know, this idea of 1 trillion years plus, 1,000 billion years plus. They don't really say much about the age of the perhaps far younger outer space levels. Have you got any sort of thoughts about this distinction between what has been evolving for so long as the grand universe in relation to the age of what might be a very young outer space levels?
I guess you're asking me about physical evolutionary differences.
Yeah.
Um,
Just to clarify, in the way you've set up a super universe of Orvonton, for example, it's very much like the stuff that we see in the so-called outer space levels. There's no real distinction between this, and it's all astrophysically, it could all be done in, say, 20 billion years. But once you throw in the concept of a truly ancient grand universe measured in trillion or more years, then that
Right.
opens up another aspect to the concept of what has been created. If the fourth organizers and the seven master spirits have been manipulating the space, energy and matter of the grand universe for 1 trillion years, that might be implying something which we haven't accounted for yet.
well, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
But the next book, I forget where, it says, it appears to you that the universe is running down, and, because of entropy. But then they point out that there are all of these creative energy activities going on, not just the force organizers, but there's energy beaming out from paradise to the capitals of the super universes, which then subsequently beam it down through the power centers all the way down to individual inhabited planets. So there's all of this continuous creation of energy. To me, in my mind, if God can create as much energy as he wants, there's no reason why the grand universe can't continue to exist forever. Because there's any energy that may be lost due to entropy can be easily replaced by God, and only by God.
George, the reason I throw that up is because if we've had an astrophysical structure evolving for 1 trillion years, as in the grand universe, then that allows for something far more unexpected when you're considering what a super universe might be in this plane, the plane of the grand universe. If it's been doing its thing, being organized, managed and manipulated or perfected for 1 trillion years, then what I'm pointing to, I was in my presentation 2 days ago now, I only gave half about the mass and matter. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but the other half, which is upcoming, is my attempt to explore the idea of the super universes. And what I'm thinking, for me, what you've done, you've mined the data and pulled out this extraordinary, these walls, this is there in the data, but I'm thinking it fits actually much neater as the first outer space level rather than the super universe space level. But that's, I've got a lot of discussion to go, you and me, I think we've got a lot to talk about with regards to how that could be. Because as you've got this confidence and this degree of certainty about how to plot, how to map out the super universe space level, I've got a very similar level of enthusiasm for doing it a different way. So that's all for the future, but I think just to put my flag in the ground here, my mark in the ground, I think what you've got there in the yellow will turn out to be the core of the first outer space level, not so much the super universe space level. But that's that's going to be an academic discussion there. Again, great work, George. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nigel.
I have one more question about the size of the first outer space level, and I recall that the Urantia book says that at some point beyond the grand universe there is an increasing density of galaxies for about 25 million light years, And I
Right.
presume that that means that it falls off about the same, so that the first outer space level should be about 50 million light years in depth. Is that what you agree with, or do you think it's different?
I've looked at that statement quite carefully, and what it specifically says is that there's an increasing intense energy activity for 25 million light years, period. So, just because it's intensively increasing over that distance doesn't mean that it stops and then starts decreasing. If I read, if I'm reading precisely what they're saying and not inferring something they're not saying, then 25 million light years essentially puts us in the neighborhood of the Virgo cluster, which is a cluster of 1,000 or more galaxies. So that's how I interpret it. And I think, assuming that it decreases by the same rate beyond 25 million light years, I think that's reading into what's not actually stated.
Well, don't they give you also, or give us a distance to the beginning of the second outer space level? There's then a period of area of relatively quiescent space, and then another space level, and they give a distance for that too, if I recall.
Right, it's still greater activities are taking place beyond these regions. For the Uversa physicists have detected early evidence of force manifestation more than 50 million light years beyond the outermost ranges of phenomena in the first outer space level. These activities undoubtedly presage the organization of the material creation of the second outer space level of the master universe. Is that what you were
Yes,
after?
exactly.
Seems to be
And so
setting
again,
up,
here they are giving
Well,
us
but
fairly
the
specific.
way, what it says actually is that 50 million light years beyond the first outer space level is where the second begins. It doesn't say 50 million light years from the inner perimeter of the first outer space level. In other words, so it says there's about 400,000 light years between the exterior border of the superior space level and the beginning of the first outer space level. Then it says activity increases for 25 million light years. Then it goes on to say 50 million light years beyond the outer perimeter of the first outer space level, we see activity of the second outer space level. This is how I interpret it.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
I agree. But do you agree with those numbers?
I do. Up to, well, in other words, like I said, the big problem with astronomy is distances. In other words, in my addendum, I actually proposed a different way to calculate distances, which doubles and triples based on the redshift. But again, if you look at this purely in terms of form, if you look at it geometrically, if you look at, you can plot on a flat surface the plane, the superuniverse plane. Let me go to a. In other words, like in this structure, in this image here, you don't really need to know the exact distances to the superuniverse wall galaxies, the galaxies in the Sloan Great Wall, or the wall of quasars. You don't need to know the exact distance. All you need to know is that one is in front of the other. So this avoids all of these issues of interpretation, which distance is. You have to interpret the data to find the distance. This is simply, we see a galaxy and it has this redshift. So use redshift as a relative measure of distance instead of an absolute measure of distance. Then you've got the geometry right here of the plane of creation. You have this sequence where these visible structures are aligned in a plane on the same plane at different distances from us.
Well, George, I'd like to, once again, compliment you on what I think is just a phenomenally insightful study you've made of the NASA data. And there's no question about the geometry. We're kind of getting into the weeds a little bit here. And I'm thinking maybe we should continue this on some sort of a forum where we can continue to discuss some of the details, some of the questions that we've raised. And there's no question about what you have given this a great deal of thought, and I think we could profit from, from discussing it further with you. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to.
I think you've clearly given us just a fantastic paper here to end our symposium on. It's a very high note. I'm sorry you couldn't be with us, but we understand. And we're just delighted that you've taken the time to, to zoom in here to 533 and give us this great treat of data.